Hazrat Jafar, a relative of the Prophet of Islam on that day, was called to the court of the king to give a testimony about the faith of this new prophet who had arisen in Arabia. And he called alongside him to stand there and to give a testimony whether or not the statement is true or false. The very enemy of the prophet of that time, named Abu Sufyan, who was a leader of the Meccans, to declare whether or not this statement was true. So in fact, it is not merely the statement of a relative of the Prophet of Islam, not merely the statement of a companion of his, a lover of his, but also the statement of an enemy, the arch enemy. For if it were not true, he would have struck that down in the court of law of that king at that very moment and had it corrected for all time. But he did not correct it, and this is what the man had to say about what was being taught to them. Were they being taught about aggression and violence and militancy or otherwise? He said, and I quote, "We were an ignorant people, given to all manner of vices. We had no regard for the ties of kinship. We misbehaved toward our neighbors, and the strong among us suppressed the weak. In this situation, God sent among us his messenger, who called us to worship the one true God, and who inculcated faith, truth, honesty, and kindness toward the kindred. He urged us to behave well towards neighbors, forbade vice, and devouring the substance of orphans." And in fact, this was the grand revolution which the Prophet of Islam had inaugurated in Mecca, and still is the message of Islam, which has been the hallmark of our faith, unfortunately misunderstood. In many cases, it is not practiced by even those who are adherents of this grand spiritual tradition. Thus, we find Edward Gibbon saying this: "Prophet Muhammad breathed among the faithful a spirit of charity and friendship, recommended the practice of the social virtues, and checked by his laws and precepts the thirst of revenge and the oppression of widows and orphans. The hostile tribes were united in faith and obedience, and the valor which had been idly spent in domestic quarrels was vigorously directed against a foreign enemy. The wars of the Muslims were sanctified by the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. But among the various precepts and examples of his life, the caliphs, those who succeeded him, selected the lesson of tolerance that might tend to disarm the resistance of the unbelievers." This was the message of Edward Gibbon, a non-Muslim writer in the last century, speaking about the grand achievements in the life of the Prophet Muhammad. I add to that one more statement by Thomas Carlyle, where again he praises the messenger of Islam and his faith Islam, and speaks about the reality of this religion in the course of human history. He says, "Our current hypothesis about Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, that he was a scheming impostor, a falsehood incarnate, that his religion is a mere mass of quackery and fatuity, begins really to be now untenable to anyone. The lies which well-meaning zeal has heaped round this man." And when he says this, heaped around this man, I think again of those pillars where we're casting all these stones upon this heap of rock, thinking we are doing a service, when in fact, if we are not careful, we are the ones which are being condemned in the process. For those stones, they do also speak, and they speak to realities of what is going on that occasion. So he says again, "The lies which well-meaning zeal has heaped round this man are disgraceful to ourselves only. It is really time to dismiss all that. The word this man spoke has been the life guidance now of 180 million of men these 1,200 years. Now, of course, we know we're talking well over 1 billion people. A greater number of God's creatures believe in Muhammad's word at this hour than in any other word whatever. Are we to suppose that it was a miserable piece of spiritual composition, this which so many creatures of the Almighty have lived by and died by? I, for my part, cannot form any such supposition. We can only hope and pray at this junction of human history. Very special time in this year. As I said, it's a time of a congregation, a convergence of people, souls in the house of God in Mecca. But also, remarkably, at the end of this year, a convergence of faith. The season of Hanukkah and the season of Christmas, bringing all the spirit of joy and love and peace on earth. And we would hope and pray that this spirit will once again prevail in all of our minds and our hearts as we reach out toward one another. That should be one of our prayers during this season and one of our hopes for next year, that we will not see another year where riots take place and wars continue and the human blood is spilled in different parts of this land. Again, as I sat on that plane, I saw all these young people in the airport and on that plane dressed in the soldier's uniform. And I kept thinking about them, about their lives and their loved ones, and the hope for which they have been going forth, and sometimes the tragedy, and the messages would come back. And I, for one, hope and pray that our lives will truly once again be given to God, and our faiths will truly be this message of La ilaha illallah, all our hearts, all our minds, all our souls directed toward the love and worship of God. May we witness that day in our lifetime, and may we witness the peace that will come through it if all of us should work on this as one. God willing, thank you so much.